Okay, it's 5 o'clock. We're gonna get started. Welcome to the second day of the Miles City Flood Awareness Day. We'll start off with John Palmquist. Did I say that right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, with the National Weather Service. Then at 5:30, we go to Chief Stevens, the Miles City Fire Chief, or Miles City Fire Department. And then we have Erin May on, who was supposed to be yesterday, but she will present at 6. And so today's meeting will go from 5 to 6:30 instead of 5 to 6. So we'll start there. Sean, go ahead.
Sure. All right, let me share my screen. Let's see.
You need to be a co-host, Sean?
Yeah, I need to be a co-host.
There you go.
Perfect, thank you. All right, you should see the first slide here. I believe so. Okay. All right, so again, my name is Sean Palmquist. I am a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Billings. For this presentation, we're going to go over a few different things here. A little bit about the National Weather Service, kind of who we are, the products we issue, at least related to flood alerts, that sort of thing. And then kind of talk about the different types of flooding, and then getting into more of how can you stay informed, and then taking a look at our current conditions across the region, and then how that may relate to looking at flood outlook for later this month into June, because really that'll be our peak time for flood season, at least here in southeast Montana. So a little bit about us. We are one of 122 different offices across the country, and that's Alaska, the lower 48, Hawaii, even some territories like Guam and Puerto Rico as well. We essentially cover southern Montana into Sheridan County, Wyoming. So from the Bozeman Pass, so west of Livingston, all the way to the Dakotas border. And it's roughly the size of the state of Pennsylvania, just about. So 16 counties in southern Montana and northern Wyoming. We cover around anywhere from 250,000 to 300,000 people in that area. How we are staffed, we cover 24 hours a day, so 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have a staff of 23. That includes meteorologists with a minimum of 2 on duty at all times. And then we also have electronic and computer system experts who maintain some of the major observation systems. So like for the Miles City Airport and some of the NOAA weather radio transmitters across the region. All right, so now getting away from what we do or what we are into some of the flood alerts that we issue. So 2 main different kind of alerts. One relates to flash flooding. And so that's really for rapid flooding. So a lot of rain in a short amount of time, or let's say a dam failure. So just a lot of water moving in a short period of time. So things that happen fast. And then the other one is river floods. And now this is the one that most people are more common, or it's most common with people. And this is your longer term flooding. See the picture here. So this was from the Yellowstone River flooding last year. So this was Paradise Valley. And then ice jams. So again, no stranger to ice jam flooding along the Yellowstone and Tongue. All right, so with flash flooding, they can occur from heavy and excessive rainfall downstream in areas that may experience little or no rainfall. And the key elements for this have to do with rainfall intensity, duration. So those are your slow moving storms. Topography, so the steeper the terrain, the more flooding you're going to get, and then soil conditions. So, are your soils already saturated, or has it been a really dry period and can it pull in a lot of moisture? And then ground cover. So what kind of ground are you dealing with? Are you dealing with a sandy soil, or are you dealing with like something like clay or rock or concrete, something that's going to let a lot of water run off very quickly. So, like urban areas tend to flood more than areas, rural areas. So key elements there. All right, and this is kind of how you would see our flood alerts go out. So generally speaking, you're typically going to see what we call an outlook first. So this is your first indication that hazardous weather may develop. It's intended to provide information to those who need considerable lead time to prepare for an event. So let's say we're eyeing a very warm period and expecting a lot of snow melt or a precipitation event on top of snow. And we're, are seeing this maybe 3, 5, even 7 days out. This is where we're going to send out like a hydrologic outlook to alert those people that are, in emergency planning or have property near the rivers and have cattle and farming equipment that they need to start thinking about moving things away from the water. So we try to send out an outlook, at least a few days in advance. Watches are, this is your time to prepare for the possibilities. So when we issue a watch, conditions are favorable for a particular weather event to develop. That could be a threat to life or property and could impact a region, but at this point in time, your location, timing, and severity is not fully known. And then warning means it's time to take action. So particular weather event could threaten life and property. It is occurring or imminent, and significant weather impact is expected to move across the region with high certainty. So for these, I like to tell people, think of severe thunderstorm warning, tornado warning. We're familiar with those kind of alerts. And so flooding is the same thing with flood warnings. So significant weather impact with high certainty. And then advisories, you'll see these as well. So sometimes you'll see us put out flood advisories. So this just means be aware, flooding may cause a significant inconvenience. If caution is not exercised, could lead to situations that may threaten life or property. So not quite a warning level impact, but it's something to be alerted to. All right, now moving on into river floods. So they can occur from extended periods of moderate to heavy rainfall. We're going to typically see gradual rises on area rivers and streams. For us, this is typically the spring snow melt season. So on the Yellowstone and Tongue rivers. So when the snow starts to melt out of the Beartooth and Absarokas, makes its way into the Yellowstone River or melts in the Bighorn Mountains down in southern Montana, northern Wyoming, and starts making it into the Tongue rivers. That's typically our flood season. That's what we see. And so normally, especially as far downstream as Miles City, you're going to see it come in for days in advance, right? So it's not like a flash flood. And you can monitor your river observations and forecasts. If you go to water.weather.gov, it'll pull up a map with the different gauges across the region. And these are operated by the state of Montana, U.S. Geological Survey, so USGS, and you can click on them. And for Miles City, we've got the point or the hydrograph gauge at the Yellowstone River at Miles City, and then the Tongue River at Miles City as well. So for the Yellowstone at Miles City and the Tongue at Miles City, those are provided by the USGS. We do provide on a routine basis, Monday through Friday, for the Yellowstone at Miles City, 5 days worth of forecast precipitation and or snowmelt. And for the Tongue, it's kind of as needed. If things look like they're getting close to minor flood, that sort of thing, then the River Forecast Center down in Kansas City will start issuing forecasts for that. But again, you can find these at water.weather.gov. What's nice about these is historical data is provided, so you have some context to that forecast, so you can see how things compare to either recent crests, so the last several years, or to historic crest. So what's gone on in the past? You know, how high does this compare? That sort of thing. Also shows you a map of kind of where that is, and then if there's any known impacts as well, you can view that. And it also gives you different flood categories. All right, so now kind of going into some of the videos we show. So this here is just the flooding threat. This is Houston, Texas. Just to give you an idea, so 6 inches or less, all it takes to knock you off your feet. About a foot of water to move vehicles. So obviously not not a good thing here. They drove right past emergency vehicles and went right into the water. So just giving you an idea. All right, kind of giving into some of the flash flood events here. So Miles City, no stranger to heavy rainfall. This was actually the greatest all-time daily record rainfall. This was back on April 23rd, 24th of 2016. So just under 3 inches of rainfall, broke the old record that was set back in 1964. And so they actually had significant ponding of water. You can see one of the underpasses downtown was flooded out. And then actually, if you look closely, there was hail floating in there. So again, Miles City, no stranger to heavy rainfall. Just to give you an idea of what damage flash floods can do. So taking a look at the Colorado Front Range, this was back in September of 2013. Historic flooding. So they had a series of flash flooding events, 8 fatalities, $2 to $3 billion in damage. 18,000 people had to be evacuated, 19,000 plus homes and businesses damaged. And the big thing here too, nearly 500 miles of roadway damaged and 50 bridges destroyed. So hard hitting and long lasting effects. Now something more local here. You know, we just haven't had a lot of flash flood events in recent years, but they do happen. This was from Shepherd in Yellowstone County back in June of 2015. Slow moving severe thunderstorm. So that's the key, a slow moving thunderstorm. So they estimated 3 to 5 inches of rainfall in 1 hour. Water flowed over this particular road and significant hail piled up in drainages. So that clogged the culverts, that kind of thing. And then the water moved over the road and you got severe erosion and the road washing out. All right. So now kind of moving on into how you can stay informed. First thing we say is just to visit weather.gov. So that's the National Weather Service page. So www.weather.gov. That's gonna give you a map of the country. And then you can either, you know, by finding your local forecast by putting in your address, zip code, what have you, or just clicking on the map. So if you click on Southern Montana, it's going to bring you to the National Weather Service Billings office page. And so it's zoomed in on Montana here. And you can click on Miles City and that'll give you a 7-day forecast, or you can see on the map different alerts, advisories, watches, warnings, that sort of thing that are on there. And then you're also going to see graphics. So I grabbed just a screenshot from last week when we were looking at potential flooding. You know, that system didn't really pan out as we expected, but we were advertising potential for heavy rainfall and possible flooding with that. And those graphics, like I mentioned, they're going to kind of outline hazardous weather. So we call these weather stories. Essentially, if there's anything we think that's important and the public needs to know about, we're going to put them in there. So that could be anything from, let's say, a winter storm coming in a few days, severe thunderstorms, flooding, that sort of thing. And in this particular instance, even like dense fog. All right. Moving on to some of the alerts that you can have. So now that everybody pretty much has smartphones, this is a big thing. Wireless emergency alerts. You may have heard of that. So WEAs. So emergency messages are sent by authorized government alerting authorities. So this includes the National Weather Service. They can alert for severe thunderstorms, tornado, and flash flood warnings, along with Amber alerts and other presidential alerts. To see if you have these turned on, you can go into your phone settings and to your notifications, and then there should be a tab called Government Alerts. Essentially, it pings the cell phone towers, and if you're within that area, it's going to alert your cell phone. You can find more information by going to www.ready.gov/alerts. And again, this is a very kind of a brief, simple message. These are truncated down so that it is able to go out via text message. So if you do get one, I would suggest consulting other resources for more details. But it's a nice little alert to have, and it makes it available to a lot of people in that area. So if you're looking for a mobile app, this is something the Weather Service does not have. So what you can do is we say partner with the Red Cross. Partners with the Red Cross can help. And so they actually have disaster apps that you can find. They have a tornado app, which you can set up alerts for your particular area for tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, flash flooding, that kind of thing. Or an emergency app, which allows you to pick anything you want. So anything from severe weather to even, let's say you're interested in fire weather. So red flag warnings, that kind of thing, or fire weather watches. And then even we'll give you an audible siren when your app is closed on your phone as well. So an app that can help. All right, other places that we post information. So Facebook, U.S. National Weather Service, Billings, Montana. If you search that, we have a Facebook page that we routinely post information to, try to update that at least once a day. And we're always monitoring that. Twitter as well. So on Twitter, you'll see a lot of notifications come across. If we're issuing warnings and that kind of thing, you can actually see those come across there as well. All right, moving on.
You're running late, and your path is blocked by water crossing the road. It doesn't look that deep, so you decide to drive through it. Bad decision, and it may be your last.
All right, again, I mean, you may hear us beat this to death, but no joking matter. Turn around, don't drown. As it mentions, just takes 12 inches of water to move a small vehicle, a little bit more for a larger truck. And again, more than half of the deaths from flooding each year occur in vehicles.
You're running.
Okay, moving on to the last part of the presentation. We'll take a look at kind of current conditions and then how that pertains to looking ahead at the flood outlook. So this is kind of looking at the last year. Again, this is only through April. So these graphics are kind of created by a monthly basis. But looking at from May of last year through April of this year, just looking at the temperatures, overall, near normal to slightly below normal. And that has, had to deal with a couple of cold months in the wintertime, and actually a little bit cooler as we went into the first part of spring. Looking at precipitation, normal precipitation. So we were a little bit wetter through the first half of winter. Kind of the second half was a little bit drier. So we did see at least in the last year, slightly below normal precipitation, close to near normal to below normal precipitation. In some areas a little bit better than others. Taking a look at the current soil moisture, so this is the top, essentially the top layer of soil. You can kind of see, if you look at this map here, the green and blue, it just means that the soil is more saturated. If you look at more yellow to red, means that it's a little bit drier. So it's kind of a mixed bag across the region. You can see in the foothills of the Bighorns, it's actually pretty saturated. And so that's something to keep in your mind. If we do get anything, like heavy thunderstorms or heavy precipitation events down towards the Bighorns, a lot of that's going to go into straight to runoff and get into the rivers, like the Tongue, that eventually do flow down towards Miles City. But overall in Custer County, soil isn't too saturated yet. So we're still looking at, our spring rains to kind of help us there. But overall, pretty much a mixed bag across the region. Taking a look at the latest drought monitor for Montana, Custer County, the far eastern and far northwest part of the counties are actually listed as a moderate drought right now, and the rest of the county as just abnormally dry. And now we are starting to get into our wettest months of the year, so we'll see how that changes moving forward. But if you take a look at the seasonal drought outlook, so this is looking at several months, and this is produced by kind of a multitude of people. So the Climate Prediction Center, part of NOAA, and they're showing an improvement of the drought and drought removal likely. So improving drought conditions as we head into the remainder of the spring and into summer. So, and then just to kind of give you an idea, this is our monthly precipitation normals for Miles City. So as I mentioned, we are headed into our wettest months. So May, June, and July are the 3 wettest months in Miles City. So, that has a lot to do with our big precipitation events, and then also the thunderstorm risk. So we do see a lot of thunderstorms this time of year. Looking at what is remaining in the snow in the mountains, if we look at the upper Yellowstone, so that's essentially what feeds the Yellowstone River, we're at about 82% of normal. So we've actually melted out a good amount in that kind of 8,000 to 6,000 foot range. We still have a little bit of snow above 9,000 feet. So that's like outside of Cook City, they still have anywhere from 25 to 30 inches of water remaining in the snowpack up there. But overall, we're trending in the right direction with the kind of the warm periods we've had. We've melted out a good amount. So at least as far as the Yellowstone River goes, we're not looking at like a much above normal snowpack at this point in time. Looking down into Wyoming, so this would be for the Tongue River. You notice in the Bighorns, the Tongue is at about 66% of normal, and then if we look at the Powder River, just below 50%. So we've actually melted out quite a bit already of what's in the Bighorns. And so again, not looking at a much above normal snowpack left in there as well. As far as looking at the temperature and precipitation outlooks for May, June, and July, so pretty much our flood season, you'll notice it says equal chances for temperatures and equal chances for precipitation. So what this means is that just there's not a strong signal at this point in time, at least for the Climate Prediction Center is seeing, to point us into above or below normal temperatures of precipitation. It just means that anything's possible. So there's equal chances for near normal, below normal, or above normal. There's just not a lot of confidence there. So that's what that means. If we were to take a look at the seasonal flood outlook for the Tongue at Miles City, This was based on conditions about just over a week ago, so a little bit higher. But if you look at these charts here, essentially the lighter color means a 10 to 25% chance, the green 25 to 50, and then as you go darker, the higher the probability. So there's a small chance, so less than 25% of the tongue at Miles City, maybe nearing minor as we head towards the end of the month. And again, this is more based on seasonal and climate trends, like what normally happens. When does the tongue normally peak? And that's typically towards the middle to latter part of May, but fairly low at this time. I would give that around a 10% chance of happening. Taking a look at the Yellowstone River in Miles City, you can see that's even lower. And so at this point in time, not even going the potential to go above minor. So less than a 10% chance. And again, that's kind of the end of May into the first part of June. And again, that's kind of typically when we see the Yellowstone peaking. If we look at things on a regional level, this is 25% or greater risk for flooding based on conditions as of today. You'll notice less than 25% chance of flooding. And so across the region, we see a low risk for flooding at this time. So kind of to summarize things, and this is a kind of an obvious thing, but river flood events in a region are driven by big precipitation systems arriving during the snowmelt season. Case in point, last year, that was a great example. We were looking at low potential for flooding across the region, and then we put 3 to 5 inches of rain on top of, well, essentially what we melted out of the snow was 5 inches. So it almost was a 10-inch precipitation event. And for our region, snowpack alone is generally not enough to produce flooding. So our rivers are able to handle that snow melt. It takes these large precipitation events falling on top of the snow to really give us flooding impacts. So at this point in time, current conditions and runoff forecasts are not hinting at significant river flooding. And then I always just put this plug out there. If you want to help out and give us observations, COCORAS, the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, they report rainfall and snowfall near your community. Essentially, you report precipitation on a daily basis, and this stuff's very useful. It's used in actually the river forecasts and in the climate. So very useful information. And that is all I have. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Tom. Any questions? Any questions? All right. You guys are off the hook, Sean.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yep, you're welcome.
All right. We're just 2 minutes away. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start.
Go ahead.
All right, well, my name is Brandon Stevens. I'm the fire chief here in Miles City. And excuse me, my voice is kind of starting to go, I think, but Sam had asked me to talk a little bit about emergency preparedness. And so I'm gonna talk about that. Excuse me 1 second. And how you can plan for that as a community. And that will deal with not only floods, but wildfire, drought, blizzards, a number of things. They all kind of fall into the same category. And so I've taken quite a few courses in this from the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And I also sit on the state incident command team on the command staff as liaison for all hazard incident management team. So we respond to all kinds of different events throughout the state, including floods. I went last year and served on the Livingston flood event for 2 weeks. And so kind of as we talk about this, it all kind of comes down to a few simple things that people tend to forget and overlook. And so by doing those few simple things, you can really stay ahead of the game. Most natural disasters you have a higher chance of surviving and being okay if you prepare for that in advance. And a lot of times people don't do that, or they don't think about the things that they should prepare for. So I'll talk about a number of those things, but really we're just going to base it down into 4 simple steps that you can do to prepare for a natural disaster. And that is 1, get informed. Number 2, make a plan. Number 3, assemble a kit. And then number 4 is pretty simple, is just maintain your plan and your kit. So we're going to talk about each one of those. Gosh, sorry. So getting informed, it's kind of the way that I want to talk about this is, if you can imagine somebody moves into a new community, they're not familiar with the community whatsoever. How do they get informed about what's going on in that community? For those people that have lived in Miles City or born and raised in Miles City, we kind of know what the natural disasters that are common to our area are. But if somebody were to move here and they didn't know anything, where do they get that information? So we can start at the local DES office, and DES is Disaster and Emergency Services. Corey Chagas is our local DES person, and then we have a statewide rep that's out of Roundup for our area. And they have all kinds of information on how the Montana plan works for disaster and emergency services, what kind of disasters are common in your area, and where to reach out. The American Red Cross also serves as another really good site that you can get information, and even on a local level, they have representatives in our area. Other areas you could get informed is recently we've done the hazard mitigation process, and there's a public input portion of that where the important parts of that plan that the public need to be informed about were put out in questionnaires and asking for input. And so that went out on social media, the city's website, the county's website. And so the state, as a hazard mitigation process, we've been trying to collect data to see, what are some things that maybe some of the people in the community, feel is important, and what are some of the challenges they may have. But that hazard mitigation plan will be posted online, so everybody in the public can take a look at that and see what the local hazards are and what the plan is locally to respond to those hazards. The DNRC office and BLM also serve as really good information areas to get information about specifically wildfire. Our local floodplain administrator. And then last but not least would be our local emergency planning committee. That planning committee meets on a quarterly basis, and it's open to the public, and we discuss planning that affects our community and issues that have come up. And we really don't see a lot of public participation in, to be honest, at any level. It's very unfortunate, but so that's one of the things on the federal level. That's what they're pushing out. That's the big first part, is to get informed. So those are the resources. Now, what do you want to get informed about? Again, is looking at what the community hazards are. Each community is different and what their hazards might be. Our hazards here specifically, through the hazard mitigation plan, we're looking at flood, fire, wind, drought, and blizzard. Those are the big ones that we're looking at. Although we could be susceptible to earthquake or volcanic eruption, things like that. These are the most common ones that affect us. And so through that community disaster plan, we update our emergency operating plan for the community. And that's also a public record, so anybody can take a look at that. And that actually is a book about this thick, and it has every single type of incident that our community may respond to, and what the plan is for that. And so that's a good way to get informed. And then another thing that people should get informed about, not only the hazards that are in each specific community, but some of the local community warning systems. Every community has a different one, but we have our air raid sirens that go off that tell you, hey, something's going on. You need to, get online or get on the radio and listen to instructions about the upcoming hazard. Currently, locally, we use a Nextel system, which sends out an alert to cell phones, so that people can get information, whether it's, if there's a large storm coming, if there's evacuations, anything of that nature. Obviously, social media, and then the regular old-fashioned media, the radio, and obviously newspaper gives good information. But for like immediate disasters, you want information right now. And so another good resource is the NOAA weather radio system. And so we try to push that a lot. So those are ways to get informed about what the hazards are in our area and a little bit about each one of those hazards. Step 2 is to make a plan. So after you're informed about what those hazards are, it's recommended that you meet with your family members and discuss those, review the information, and explain the dangers, especially to children, and so that they understand, what this plan is going to be. So a few things that you should do in your plan is, number 1, you should have an out-of-town contact. And everybody should have that same contact in your family group. So say like me and my family, our contact could be my mother-in-law in Bozeman. So the reason for that is efficiency and effectiveness. So if there was a big wind event that came through town and, several structures are damaged and people are trying to just figure out where loved ones are, where pets are, who's safe, who's not. One of the worst things that you can do is just start scatter phone calling, trying to reach everybody. And so what happens is a lot of times the cell phone networks go down because there's so much usage all at once. If the landlines are down, that also makes it difficult. So if you have an out-of-town contact, everybody in your family group can contact that person and let them know where they are, if they're safe, and what they need. And so instead of like me calling my brother in Florida to let him know I'm safe, and if he's heard from my kids, or my kids calling, my sister-in-law, we all have one point of contact. So everybody contacts that person, and it makes it effective and efficient. And then that way information can get relayed. The other good thing about that is you're limiting the number of calls that can be that are allowed to happen in those disasters on the cell phone network. So so a lot of times I know, like in specific disasters, they'll bring in cell phone towers, portable cell phone towers, and put those up. But again, the traffic gets so high that calls start dropping and communication starts breaking down. And so a lot of times that can be frustrating, but if you're all calling the same person, everything can get relayed that way. And also what you want to do with that is you want everybody in your family group to have that number memorized by heart, because you don't know where you're going to be at when a disaster happens. You're not always just at your house. You could be at work, you could be at school, you could be at the grocery store, you could be at the bucket horse sale, like it just like things do happen. And so you're not always going to be together. And if everybody has that number by heart, then it can make that call. And I think it's even more important now that most people don't remember phone numbers these days. It's all stored in our phones electronically. So you just hit the person's name and it makes that call. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a bit. So not only having the single point of contact, it's a really good idea for family groups to decide where to meet if there is a disaster. Like I said, you're not always together when the disaster happens. So, it could be, somewhere outside of your home or somewhere outside of town. It's good to pick both, because if your home's destroyed or if it's flooded and you can't get to that, that meeting spot doesn't do any good. So in case of all communication breakdown, if you have a separate meeting spot that's not only at your home, but somewhere else outside of town, then you can go to that spot and family members can meet in the event of complete and total communication breakdown. So with that, completing a family communication plan is good, and having the numbers ahead of time. So contact information for family and friends, local resources, poison control, work numbers, school numbers. And there's actually a sample chart for that to actually fill in that document at, it's www.rating.gov. And it's a FEMA resource that you can use to go ahead and start filling out information about your plan. But not only with having that meeting spot, it's good to have different escape routes planned for specific disasters. So if you know you're in an area that could flood, okay, having a good plan with your family, letting them know, okay, well, you know, if it does flood here, this road's probably going to wash out, so we're going to take this road. And knowing that ahead of time is huge, and having that plan. Or if you're in a wildfire area, knowing what your evacuation route would be and where you're going is going to make a big difference, because you're not trying to make that decision on the fly when everything's kind of turning south, so to speak. And again, if you have that information ahead of time in your plan and everybody knows it, it's a lot easier to have that transpire, because sometimes evacuations need to happen on a moment's notice. And so it's not always something that you can kind of, hey, you know, in the next few days, this might happen. It might be something like, hey, we have to evacuate now. And so we always recommend everybody making a home escape plan, and not only just having, you know, your designated routes, but taking down a piece of paper and writing out escape routes throughout your home, so that, you know, small children know how to get out of the house in the event of a fire or a natural disaster. And in there, you can include water shutoffs, gas shutoffs, all kinds of different information in there that if you have to talk to somebody over the phone about how to get to where your water system is, you can read that. So there's a lot of information on that. And then also based on the family dynamic, you know, everybody's family is different. And so this is really kind of where the meat of the plan comes in, is planning for those that have disabilities or special needs. And not only, you know, you could kind of box that together, but just only your specific needs. And we'll kind of talk about that as far as like, you know, having a plan for, well, I'll talk about it in the kit, but your own prescription medication or individual medical needs that you may have. But planning for those with disabilities or other special needs, you know, there's a lot of people that have specific medical equipment that has to have a current, you know, electricity to it or a battery backup. And so, you know, what is the plan for those individuals if the power is going to be out for 3 or 4 days? You know, that's kind of one of those things of having that plan of like, okay, well, if we did have a flood here in Miles City and somebody's on some specific life support equipment, you know, we want to make that phone call immediately that, you know, hey, if we have to evacuate, we have somebody on this specific piece of medical equipment that has, you know, only 6 hours of battery backup. So we got to get them to another area that has power, whether that's to a shelter that has the generators that are running or to another community. And so not everybody can just get up and move, right? So some of the things that we'll talk about is having the information in the kit available, so that, you know, if you do need to, you know, get somebody to give you a ride, you're making those phone calls early, or if you need to pay for fare to get to another town, having those things in your kits. Having a plan what you're going to do with your pets, and that goes not only for your household pets, but also like farm animals. A lot of shelters, and it just kind of depends on the one, will not let pets into the shelter unless they're service animals. So you can imagine that if a large flood came through our area and we have several designated shelters, people have pets and animals. They show up to the shelter because their house is underwater, you know, and they have to turn their animals away. That presents a problem for them to deal with that at that time, versus having a plan like, okay, hey, you know, we have a relative that lives, you know, out of town a little bit. If we do have something, we're going to take our household pets to that person, or we're going to board them at this, you know, veterinarian clinic or something like that. But having those plans is huge. because then you're not having to deal with any of the information, or you're not having to deal with trying to problem solve during a disaster. Throughout your plan, what you're gonna also want to do is assemble a kit, and those kits can be very simple or they can be very complex. But those kits are going to make the difference between, you know, being able to make good, accurate decisions versus trying to scramble, run through your house and grab things that you think you're going to need. And obviously, if it's an immediate evacuation, you're going to forget something, you're going to miss something. So having that stuff set up ahead of time allows you to process the information instead of like, oh man, what are we going to need for the next 3 days? Let's grab your coat, let's grab this, and just randomly grab stuff. If you're like, okay, well, we have our emergency preparedness kit, we're going to grab that. Let's start talking about the disaster. You're able to process that information a lot better. So I'm going to go through just some things that FEMA recommends is a 3-day kit that you can stock and keep for any kind of natural disaster. So for every person in your home, you need a 3-day supply of food. And it's non-perishable food, so either canned food, or I'm a big fan of like Mountain House meals or the camp meals that you can just put boiling water in and eat right out of there. So those are really good. They're fairly inexpensive, but enough food for everybody in your house for 3 days is what they recommend. 3-day supply of water. And a good general rule is a gallon of water per person per day. And so having enough water on hand for that. And they're recommending that you kind of rotate those gallons of water out every 6 months. So it'll probably be a little bit stale water, but you know, in a disaster, you just want some clean, fresh water. So portable battery powered radio with extra batteries, and so that you can get information. Because during these disasters, the radio stations will continue to broadcast on backup power and give you information of, you know, vital information that you're going to need. Flashlight with extra batteries. Being able to see in the dark is huge, especially in a disaster. You know, if you have a big wind event that comes through and the power's cut out in your home, having a flashlight where you're not having to go search for where the flashlight is, or if the batteries are fresh, just being able to go to that kit, turn that flashlight on, and have being able to see right away is going to be huge. A first aid kit and a manual with that, just because, you know, like during wind events, people do get hurt, and those first aid kits are huge because, you know, whether it's, you know, minor first aid that needs to happen, or if it's just like some ibuprofen because, you know, it's going to make you a lot more comfortable. Sanitation, hygiene items, hand sanitizer, moist towelettes, toilet paper, things like that. Matches, lighter and waterproof container, a whistle for signaling, especially, you know, like during flood events, it gets really loud with the water hitting everything and running through communities. And so being able to signal and let people know that where you're at is huge. Extra clothing and blankets, kitchen accessories and cooking utensils, photocopies of identification and credit cards, so that if need be, you can actually, you know, purchase things, you know, and having those extra copies of your photo identification is going to help. Some cash or coins on hand to be able to buy things, purchase them with cash. They say, you know, paper money, but in flood events, a lot of times things get so saturated that they're gone. So they also say, you know, an assortment of coins so that you can purchase items. And then any kind of special needs that you're going to need for yourself. Prescription medication is huge. You know, that's something that generally gets overlooked. I know, you know, when we did the Livingston flood event last year, we were talking to the community members, a lot of the stuff that people needed beyond just hey, there's a shelter, you know, their homes were wiped out, so they go to a shelter and they're just able to stay there for the night. There's a big difference between, you know, somebody that didn't have anything and needed to go to the hospital or get prescription medication, you know, causes huge issues for that individual, that family, and then again, if they're not able to get to the hospital, it causes even more problems. So having, you know, a small supply of your prescription medication that is in that kit, so that if you need to grab that on a moment's notice, you're not going without that. Eyeglasses, or, you know, little things. It could be contact lens solution, hearing aid batteries, things like that, things that you're going to need over 72 hours while you might be at a shelter. Items for infants such as formula, diapers, bottles, pacifiers, tools that you may or may not need, pet supplies, a map of the local area, and then just anything that is going to meet your specific family needs. And then if you're in a cold climate like we are, you know, if we have a blizzard that wipes out power and you know, and we're stuck for a few days, jacket, coat, long pants, long sleeve shirt, sturdy shoes, hat, mitten, scarf, sleeping bag, warm blanket, and then having enough supplies and equipment in your kit for your vehicle in case you have to leave on a moment's notice. So another flashlight with extra batteries, first aid kit, tire repair kit with pump, booster cables, bottled water, non-perishable foods, things like that. And you can even add into your kit different things such as like hand warmers or you know, sunscreen, things like that, just so that, you know, you're going through a natural disaster, but it's even, you know, it sounds kind of silly, but you know, if you have just a blistering sunburn on top of that, it makes everything that much worse. And so a lot of the little things that we're talking about, if people do, a lot of times they'll make it out of that disaster. Like, hey, that wasn't that bad of a deal. But the difference is, you know, you may be absolutely miserable through the entire thing. So just having this information and having that that kit is huge. And then maintain your plan in your kit. You know, it doesn't do any good if you put all this stuff together and then that kit sits, you know, in the front doorway for 3 years and nobody takes a look at it. And now the batteries are corroded and the prescriptions are expired, and you know, so maintaining that kit and the information with it and keeping it up to date is huge. You know, so and the more specific needs a family unit has, the more you need to put in your kit. You know, and so if you have family members that are in they have a wheelchair and it's a powered wheelchair, you know, having a backup wheelchair that doesn't require power, you know, things of that nature. Again, the more specific needs a family unit has, then the bigger that kit should be. And then so they say to review your plan and quiz family members, hold fire and emergency evacuation drills, replace your stored water and food, and that's pretty much the basis of that. The information can all be found at ready.gov, and that's a great resource. FEMA has a lot of really good resources. And then our local hazard mitigation plan will be hopefully done by August and replace the current EOP or emergency operating plan. And so then that'll be a public record so people can see exactly you know, for fire, wildfire, where the shelters are, the designated shelters are, for flood, where the designated shelters are, where food drop-off places are, designated routes, things like that. So, any questions?
No comment, sir. You really hit home with the wheelchair. I wonder how many businesses or churches or schools have a wheelchair that's kind of in a designated area for.
Yeah.
That was really nice to hear that comment.
Yeah, I mean, it's those little things that can make a big difference
boy.
for people. So,
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Were there any other questions? Done, and I forgot to do that, again, this is Chief Stevens, the Mount City Fire Department, emergency preparedness for natural disasters. We've got just a couple of minutes before again, Erin, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Sorry, I had myself on mute.
Oh, you need,
Do you guys want to make me a presenter so I can get my presentation up?
this is Erin May.
I can't hear whoever's talking. Have you guys made me a presenter? Am I good? It doesn't look like it.
You're a co-host.
I am? Okay, let's see if I can. Trying to figure out how to share my screen here. I've done it before. Why am I not seeing it? Where my background? Apps. Is it across the bottom or is it attached to me?
Need you a co-host.
I think you need to make me a presenter. If that's an option.
See.
There we go. Now I see share screen. Hang on. So I'm getting a message that says host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay, there we go. Now I can do it.
Okay. So
Okay, thank you. There we go. Let me can put it in presenter mode. There we go. All right, does everybody see my screen? Can you guys see it? Hello?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Just want to make sure you guys have it on your screen. It looks like you should. Well, thanks everybody for accommodating me this evening and adding me onto the schedule. So what I'm going to talk about tonight are some of the changes that were implemented last year and what that means to policyholders. We're going to go into that a little bit. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. I can answer them at the end, or if somebody just wants to let me know the questions are there, we can discuss it as we go along. But these are important changes. We really hadn't updated how we rate policies since like the 1970s. Our rating methodologies were very out of date with the way private industry does things, and it wasn't reflecting the risk that we have with the rising changes in our environment, and with more population density as well. So let's get into the agenda here. We're going to talk a little bit about this. What I really wanted to talk about, this gives you an idea of an overview of how much coverage we have across the U.S. 95% of those policies are residential. Only 5 are other types of residential, commercial, and not a typical like apartment buildings or nursing homes or libraries, etc. And we've got almost 25,000 communities that participate in the NFIP. So that's a lot of communities that have joined and do that and have joined so that they can make the communities stronger and more resilient through or better building, smarter building. And Congress established us back in 1968. Hard to believe. I was 5 years old at the time. And it was intended to be a self-funded program with borrowing authority from the US Treasury for catastrophic events. We did not operate like a typical insurance company, which builds reserves. Any reserve money we had to be given back. And so when, the big events happened, the notes here in I'm cheating with notes, you guys, so I apologize. But Hurricane Rita, Katrina, and William in 2005 really put us behind because we didn't have a reserve fund. We also didn't have reinsurance. So these are some of the things that they have done in the last 10 years or so to modernize our program and have us operate more like a traditional insurance company. Currently, and this number is probably old, I don't know the current number, but it's 20 billion in debt because we had to pay back that money and because we're getting more catastrophic events. So the number that just kind of blew me away that were in these notes is that in 2020, the NFIP paid 1.2 billion in claims for the 6th consecutive year in a row. And that's the kind of, our events are increasing. They're becoming more costly, both because we have, more density, more population, and because the events are getting larger. I mean, they're actually talking about creating, a new level of category for hurricanes because they're getting so much stronger. So in 2020, as an example, that really bad year that we had, there were 30 named storms. An average year is 14 named storms, with 8 of them being hurricanes. Typically that's the average, which we had an average year last year, but believe it or not, because of that hurricane we had in Fort Myers, which has a high population, it's been a high growth area. That event was our 3rd costliest in history, even though it was just an average year. So our claim payments have also climbed. It used to be when I started in the program, we'd say an average, a foot of water in your basement costs $20,000. That average claim payment is now more like $50,000. And the NFIP was never designed to handle the volume and severity of storms that we've experienced since 2005. Our rating structures did not reflect the risk anymore. And that's why we made some of these changes. And so, we knew over the long term, the program as it was under the old system just wasn't sustainable. And the really surprising thing is that, our losses are going up in categories that aren't even high risk flood zones. So I think it's like 35% of our claims now are for people who are in low to moderate risk flood zones. So these people haven't even been identified by the NFIP. There's no flood insurance requirement to buy flood insurance for people who are in low to moderate risk flood zones. And these are people who are buying insurance voluntarily, and that's representing 35% of our claims. So that's pretty significant. So this program was, we doubled down and leveraged some new advanced technology. We work closely with the private industry, talk to them about how they do things, and started to build some better best practices for our program, and find ways to better communicate the risk and help make our communities more resilient and our program more resilient. So the next slide kind of shows you where we were at when they were transitioning over in terms of where our policy count is. So one of the things that changed with this program is that we phased out that in that upper corner, you'll see the orange box. We phased out preferred risk policies. Everybody now is rated the same. You're all rated based on your distance from the water source and then the individual risks for the building that are unique to the building. And then we no longer grandfather policies into a flood zone. We do still have something called, not necessarily called newly mapped, but we do have a transition phase similar to that. So if if a community is moving from a high risk flood zone from a low risk flood zone into a high risk flood zone, they get a phased approach. So their rates don't go straight to that actuarial rate. Their policies go up on average 18% a year until they reach that full actuarial risk. And one of the important things that they've done now on the insurance declaration pages is they show what that full actuarial rate is going to be. So people understand, here's where you are now, you're paying $800 a year. And in 5 years, you're going to be paying, $1,500 a year as an example. So they know what's coming, and it gives them a chance to figure out if an elevation certificate makes sense, or some ways to mitigate the property to lower their risk. So with that, let's go on to the next slide. One of the other things that we did is that we really worked to make the program more equitable. One of the things that we realized is that the program was inequitable in terms of low dollar homes were paying higher for the value of their home than a high value home was. And so we've made that more equitable. So somebody who's in $1 million home has a higher replacement cost valuation, and they're going to pay more for that. And so that's one of the ways that we've tried to make that more equitable. And then also, as it says on the slide here, the properties that were built before there was a flood insurance rate map, a vast majority of those policyholders are going to see that decrease in premium. And so we have been working to figure out what's the best way to eliminate some of the inadvertent subsidies that were created with this program. And you know, one of the other inequities that we've eliminated is we used to have a national rate. So somebody who lived in a coastal A zone and somebody who sits in an A zone in Montana were paying the same rates. Well, that risk isn't the same because the stream channel risk is different. And so now those rates reflect that. So that's good news. And honestly, in Miles City, I took a look last night, you guys, and I thought it was pretty fascinating. Over half of your policyholders who currently have a policy their rates were going to stay the same, or their prices were only going to go up about $20. So, you know, I was a little worried about you guys when this new rating methodology came into place. It just seemed to me, since you had such a high number of A-zone properties in your community, that you might be dinged. And really, for the most part, the vast majority of your policyholders are not going to see a dramatic change, which I think is the best news of all. I hate delivering that news when I go into a community. So the one reason that we eliminated that preferred risk policy is that we found there was an inequity there. So as you're looking in this image, you'll see there's an AE flood zone and there's a house just outside of it. The person whose house were sitting in that AE zone was paying a dramatically higher rate, and the person across the street might have been paying $1,000 less, even though they're only, 50 feet apart. So the risk really wasn't that different. So that's one of the reasons that we made these changes, is to make that more equitable across the board, and also to obviously bring in the premium to reflect the risk. So as we all know, and probably saw in last year's flooding along Yellowstone, Mother Nature puts her water wherever the heck she wants. We do our best to map and have accuracy within the community, but we can't account for everything. And so we try, but it's not always foolproof. And so, eliminating that hard line and saying this person's in an A zone and this person's out, and thus they're going to pay a dramatically different price in premium, has been eliminated because the risks really weren't that significantly different. Let's go on to the next slide. So this talks about the old rating tool. You can see we've only got a few rating variables there. When we go to the next slide, you're going to see it like goes up dramatically. But in the past, we rated off whether you were in or out. The base flood elevation, which if you're looking on this map would be the little black line. I don't see a number on there, but that would be, I see an elevation of 19 feet, for example. Obviously not, it's a Texas map here. Their elevations are much lower, but that base flood elevation is how high we estimate the flood waters are going to rise to in a large flood event. And then it was foundation type. How sturdy is the home? Does it have a basement? Is it slab on grade? Those things were, you got different rates for. And then, are you in a high risk flood zone? And then we had our fees and surcharges, but really those rating variables are what I wanted you guys to see. So let's go to the next slide so you can see, this is our new rating methodology. So we now take our FEMA maps, then we add additional data sources, other mapping data. We bring in stream channel data, the types of flood frequencies. I always have a hard time with that. And then one of the things that we added, which is hard to believe that we didn't have in the past, but we also look at pluvial flood events, which is just rain. We didn't have that on the maps in the past. So those things are now being incorporated into the rating model. And then obviously we take in that there's ratings on the stream channels. The higher the rating, the higher the rate, or the higher the risk, the higher the rate. And then what is that replacement cost valuation? That's very standard. That's what your homeowner's insurance does. And that's what we look at now. And so again, if you have $1 million home and you have a $150,000 home, the cost to rebuild is considerably lower. So those rates are different based on that. And all that data is grabbed. So we take that replacement cost valuation from data sources. Most of it is, I think in that case, it's CoreLogic, but don't quote me. And then again, I already mentioned that the distance from the flooding source and then the flood type. Does it have high wave action like a coastal event? Somebody who's in right along the ocean has got a much higher risk than somebody who's. I hear reverberation or somebody talking. Does somebody have a question? Maybe it's just my reverb. And then the building occupancy type, that's one of the rating values. Is that a residential structure? Is it a commercial structure? Is it a residential building condo association? We have a whole policy just for residential condo associations. And then construction type. And I'll go into this more and show there's some more slides with some of this information. I didn't include all the slides. This was originally an hour-long presentation that I cut down for this. So the foundation type, that's basement, crawl space, slab on grade, those kinds of things. And then what we rate off of now, in the past, it was, let's say the base flood elevation was here and your foundation was here. Your lowest floor, including your basement, was here. Well, you were going to pay a much higher rate because you sat below where we estimate the floodwaters were going to rise to. Well, now guess what? Base flood elevation is thrown out, gone, bye-bye. We consider the lowest floor or the first floor above ground. So we don't we don't look at the basement as the lowest floor or the crawl space. It's the next highest floor above ground. And then we compare that next highest floor to where the lowest adjacent grade is outside the house. So say wherever the dirt down here at the bottom of the house touches the outside of the house, that's your lowest adjacent grade. And we have a rating tool that makes assumptions on what that difference is between the lowest adjacent grade and the first floor above ground. And that's what we use as a rating source. Now, an elevation certificate can help because we're making an assumption, and it's a very conservative assumption of that difference between the first floor height and that lowest adjacent grade outside of the house, okay? And so let's say their first floor height is more like 6 feet and the assumption is 2.5 feet, okay? So if it's actually 6 feet and we get an elevation certificate showing that difference, that's gonna help somebody's rate. And the really good news with this revision and this rating methodology is now people can submit the elevation certificate with the current EC, it's section E and F, and I cannot remember the sections on the new elevation certificate that's about to come out in 30 days, but homeowners or agents or local officials can complete this form for people and submit it for insurance purposes to see if it helps their rate. Obviously, if somebody still wants to apply for a letter of map amendment or make a permanent change to the map with regard to their property, they still need to go to a surveyor or engineer or architect to have that elevation certificate completed. But for insurance purposes, they can do the elevation certificate themselves. I did just get word in the last couple of weeks that they told us that even submitting that elevation certificate with, let's say the homeowner completed it themselves, they have the underwriting has the choice to accept that information or not, which I don't like. I thought it would be submitted and they would utilize it and not use the rating tools information, but I haven't had a case yet to see how that plays out, so I can't really tell you. And then number of floors is taken into consideration. You know, in particular, this question came up a lot for residential condo, high-rise condos, where somebody on the first 3 floors obviously was more likely to take on water during a hurricane than somebody who lived on the 20th floor. And now that is going to be reflected, that difference is going to be reflected in the rate. So the higher the floor you're on, the better your rate's going to be with the flood policy through us. And then we also look at prior claims, but we are making some changes to that, and I've got a slide on it later. So let me move on to the next slide. So we also are taking into condition predominantly 2 perils. In the past, we looked at riverine and coastal. And now on the right, you can see all the different types of things that we're taking into consideration. Storm surge, the difference and the uniqueness of the Great Lakes, wave action, tsunamis, coastal erosion, pluvial inland flooding from rain, and then riverine flooding. So we've got a lot more consideration that goes into that rating model, and that helps us better assess the risk for each community and make that rate more individual for the community, which is one of the things that I know Tracy Sears, your state floodplain coordinator, really has bothered her for a long time, that it wasn't fair. We shouldn't be paying the same rates as somebody who lives in Florida or Texas or New Jersey. All right, so I went over some of the basics. Let's talk a little bit more about it. We talked about the flood insurance rate maps and how those were used. Let me see, I thought maybe this gave me some more bullets here, but it doesn't. And I need to move my little view over here so I can see these better. Hang on a second. Let's see, additional data sources. We talked about that. We're using not just the FEMA flood maps, but other mapping data to look at risk. And then that broader range of flood frequencies that we looked at on the last slide. And then that cost to rebuild. So again, this is one of those equity issues that came up, and that is that a $1 million home is likely to have higher finishes. So the cost to rebuild is higher for that property. And so that gets incorporated into the rate. Some of the rating variables we're going to move on to on the next slide. So I think I'm going to plow forward here. So we've got a broader range of flood frequency. We looked at the catastrophic modeling. We've got some urban flooding that we're taking into consideration. And those are all good things. We're narrowing down and making it more unique to the community in terms of the rate. And then we're no longer going to be having standardized rating tables. It actually was, I know my FEMA counterpart and I, who work on the flood insurance side, we could actually go in and look at the rating tables and manually figure out what people's rates were. We can't do that anymore because now it's all in this rating tool. And they use an algorithm. And so that algorithm calculates these rates based on the data that's been input. And then, as I said, that flood zone and the base flood elevation is no longer in use, but elevations will be considered for all properties. And that is a cool thing too, I didn't mention. So elevation certificates can now be used for all properties, whether you're in a high risk flood zone or low risk flood zone. It can be used for rating purposes. If they think it's going to help, it's worth it to get the form filled out and see if it helps their rate, especially if they've done some mitigation to their property. That needs to be reflected on that elevation certificate, and that may be helpful to them to have that for insurance purposes and have that information submitted to underwriting. So although I will say this, the venting used to be a great discount and it's not so much anymore. I think it's only like 5 or 10%, which is kind of disappointing to me. But they're starting off low with that discount and seeing how that works out over time, because this is a new rating model for them. So they're going to see how that goes. So we might over time see a better discount for that venting if they see that it really does help in terms of claims losses. So, okay, we talked about some of these things. I think I've got more individual slides, but I'm going to try and go into some of these rating variables. I didn't dig deep in all of them because I didn't know how interested people would be in this. But, we've talked about that distance from the flooding source and then the type of flooding. Again, you can see all the different sources that we're looking at now, the inland flooding, storm surge, which is, more hurricanes and coastal events, and Great Lakes fits into that as well, tsunamis as well. And then what impacts those have on the structures. And all of that is determined automatically using some geospatial data that we've purchased, and it's been built into the algorithm. And it's also based on the property location entered by the agent. So as you guys who work in emergency management know, especially in rural communities, not so much in town, but a lot of times the pin for a property is way out on the street and the building's back here. So sometimes the agent may need to submit the more accurate GPS data or the lat long for where the building exactly is in their quote. And so that's something that can be adjusted as well. So let's talk a little bit about the foundation types. We've got the slab on grade. We've got the basement and the crawl space. Those are the kind of the most basic foundations we have in Montana. I don't think I included the other one that showed some of the elevated, coastal structures where everything's up on piers, posts or pilings, and it's completely open below. There's no garage underneath the house, so it allows the water to go in and out. But these are the foundation types that we have most commonly. We do have some elevated structures, but not as many in our region. So I kind of wanted to include these. And in the past, what we did was that elevation certificate or, the type of foundation it had, we submitted that on the form and that determined a rate. Well, now the foundation type, it's built into the base rate. So while we may only look at the first floor height and that lowest adjacent grade next to it, the type of foundation it is that you see on the screen here is it's factored in. So when you put in slab on grade, that the rate is built into the type of foundation that it is. So, I did include the slide. I thought I hit it. But anyway, these are some of the other elevated structures. The diagram on the far right, the orange structure, is the most common that we have in our region. I will say this for those of you who work in the local community, elevated structures for new construction are always going to have your best rate, whether you're in a coastal community or not. So we highly recommend elevated structures whenever possible especially if they're in a high risk flood zone. Let's see, let's go to the next slide. So this just kind of shows one of the things that really wasn't reflected well in the past, unless somebody submitted an elevation certificate. And I'm sorry, my dog's deciding to lay down behind me here. In the past, if you were, let's say the A zone started at the top of, well, it doesn't really work in this slide, but let's say there was an A zone there and it didn't take into consideration, unless you submitted an elevation certificate, what that elevation was. Now our rating tool does take that into consideration. That geographical data is loaded in and they have that. And so, that helps tremendously, but it also shows that, two houses with a similar, not very far apart, one sits much lower and they're going to see they're going to see a difference in rate. So, build higher, get a better rate. And so that's now reflected in our rating methodology. So, again, I think I talked about this a little bit, but, elevations are going to be used in determining rates for all buildings, whether you're in a high risk or a low risk flood zone. The rating tool gathers a lot of this stuff, but again, the measurements are conservative, so it can make a difference to submit that elevation certificate. If you look at this picture, the first floor height would really be where the patio or where the covered deck is. That's the first floor height. Well, I don't know. This is a funky one because it's kind of, you've got different grades. but it would be the first floor of the building, that lower level, because part of it is below ground, would be considered below ground. And so this gives you an idea of how you make that, but where's the lowest adjacent grade? Can anybody put in the chat where they think the lowest adjacent grade is in looking at this picture? I know we don't have a full picture of this building. Anybody? Nobody willing to chime in? Okay, I would say our lowest adjacent grade is going to be on the left-hand side of that structure. That's where the lowest adjacent grade is for this house. So they're going to measure that difference to that first floor height on the next floor. Okay. These give you just some examples, or these are the ones I didn't put in for everything. But for elevated structures, you always go to the top of that floor on the elevated structure, not the bottom, the lower part. And for a slab on grade structure, you go to the top of the slab. That's where you measure the first floor height. So these just give you some examples of how it's measured through the rating tool. And then, as I said, our rating tool now will automatically, using the algorithm, develop a rate based on questions that the agent is asked. One of the benefits of this program is it's much easier for an agent to write a quote. So, in the past, it took 30 minutes to 45 minutes to write a flood policy. Now it takes 6 minutes. It's that quick. You get asked, a few questions and the rating tool automatically spits out a quote. Unless you submit an elevation certificate, and that's the other way to go. And then, as I said, that there'd be first floor height assumptions, as well as the difference between lowest adjacent grade and first floor height. And it's also based on the foundation type that they have gathered through CoreLogic. A lot of this is they've gathered and spent years developing the data on these building structures. And we really utilized, this was actually happening in the private flood insurance industry. So we matched what they were doing. And then the final method is to use that elevation certificate. You can go out and have an engineer, surveyor, and architect complete it. I don't know what the going rates are in Montana. I know in Denver, it's about $800 to $1,200 to have one done in Denver. I think Montana's a little bit cheaper than us. Or you can just fill out the sections that the homeowner or local official can fill out. And then also, we do have discounts for communities who are in the community rating system. And I know Samantha isn't on the call today. I didn't look that up last night, but I think Miles City is a CRS community. Can somebody there locally confirm that for me? I think that's the case. I think you guys do get a discount based on the work that she does with the community and what you guys do to gather information with new construction and the outreach that you're doing tonight, for example. This goes towards their points and staying in the community rating system, and as a result, gives policyholders a discount on their policy. So this was the slide that I was telling you I added in last night. When they came out with this new risk rating methodology, and we're running out of time, so I'm going to plow through this. I think this is the one change that came out this spring that I wanted to make sure everybody knew about. When risk rating came out 2 years ago or 18 months ago, they said they were going to look at a 20-year rolling history of claims, and now they're only going back 10 years. And that will start as of April 1. They'll be going forward from April 1. So that's a big change, and that's a good thing. The other thing that they're not counting as a claim are ICC claims, which is the increased cost of compliance claims. So if somebody has a catastrophic loss, or they do a substantial improvement to their property that makes the property more than 50%, the market value goes up by 50% or more, they get an additional $30,000 on the policy if they haven't exceeded our policy limits, which is $250 for residential policies. And so ICC claims, if somebody's had to elevate their home, for example, to build it in compliance after their property was damaged, that ICC claim is not count towards that rolling 20-year claim. So that's good. this is all good news. So, if any of your policyholders or anybody has questions on how to dispute their claims history, feel free to have them give me a call, or they can contact their insurance company and they can give them the information on how to submit for that and what to submit. So I think this is great news. I think there was a lot of grumbling when they came out with this 20-year history loss. So I think we talked about a lot of this, so I'm going to plow forward. These are some of the things that on the right that agents and policyholders can provide to underwriting to get a better rate rather than use the rating tool. So they can provide the ground elevation, the first floor height, replacement cost valuations can be submitted. So they need to have a appraisal submitted. And a lot of times the agent can run that. They have software that they can run that appraisal and submit. And then that claims history can also be disputed because FEMA makes mistakes occasionally, especially if it was a second home. Sometimes the two addresses get mixed up in our history. And then of course they can also submit an elevation certificate. So this kind of shows you how the deck page looks. You can see in this case that the community has a discount high enough to get $300 off their policy. They've got a $100 mitigation discount. The one thing I like to mention to local officials in case you get a call is that we do have a minimum discount and a maximum discount. So if they're already at the maximum discount through other means, you might not see a CRS discount on there. And that is confusing to a lot of local officials. We've gotten a number of calls on that. So you can see kind of how that pricing lays out. And I think it's a lot more understandable than it has been in the past. Okay, so we've gone all over this. I think I've covered a lot of this. We're at the pre-firm and the newly mapped, and we're transitioning to the true rates. The one thing on the slide I do want to mention out is that policyholders, if somebody is going into a high-risk flood zone for the first time and they had those rates where they're gradually going to their actuarial rate where the rates go up 18% a year, and for some reason they let their policy lapse, if it lapses more than 30 days, they go straight to the full actuarial risk, and there is nothing I can do to help them with that. So it's very important that if you refinance, if if your lender name changes for any reason, you've got to call your agent and let them know that, because if most people's flood insurance premium is paid out of their escrow. And so if the lender changes and you don't update that data, then your new lender doesn't know to pay for the flood insurance, and that causes a problem. We talked about community rating system. I'm going to slide through these. As I said, grandfathering is going away. We talked about that already. I don't think any of that is important. I thought I'd eliminated some of these slides. Mandatory purchase is still around. So if you have a loan and you're in a high-risk flood zone, there is still a mandatory purchase requirement. The things that aren't changing, I think this is very important. We may be changing the way we rate, but floodplain management is not. So building in a high-risk flood zone, you still have the same requirements that you did in the past. You still have to look at the flood insurance rate maps to know what your risk is and to know how to build if you're building. And the letter of map amendment process and revision process didn't change. So this also didn't change, that the percentage of premium increase hasn't changed either. So our maximum coverage limits, how much of flood insurance, the amount of flood insurance that's available through the NFIP has not changed. It's $250,000 for residential policies and $500,000 for other commercial structures, for example. And then for those residential condo associations, it's $250,000 per unit. People can still transfer their existing policyholder, if they're an existing policyholder and they're selling their home, they can transfer that policy over to the new homeowner so that the new homeowner doesn't have to go out and buy a policy. You can transfer it over, call your agent and transfer it to the new homeowner. Make sure you get the right lender information for the homeowner, the new homeowner in there properly so that the lender gets notified. And we still have that glide path. So while we don't call it, the same thing, we still have that gradual path to your full risk rate if somebody's going into a high risk flood zone for the first time. So this just kind of shows you the percentages that people are going to see an increase or decrease in premium. In our region, over 50% of our policyholders saw the same price or less in their annual premium with the advent of our new rating methodology. So with that, this gives you some of the tools that are available online that you can go out to. If you just type in NFIP risk rating methodology, you're going to get a whole bunch of, or type in that equity in action. I go to that site probably every week. There's a lot of good information there. And this just gives you some of the things that you need to know, some of the things we covered tonight. I'm going to slide past this because we're trying to get to the end. With that, I just want to say thank you, everybody. I'll put my contact information in the chat and I will give it to you guys over the line as well. My office number is 303-674-1449. And my email is erin.may@associates.fema.dhs.gov. And that's associates is plural, FEMA, FEMA, and then .dhs, that stands for Department of Homeland Security.gov. And I'll also put that in the chat for anyone who might have questions after the meeting. I'm trying to type it in as we go here. So thanks again, you guys. And I appreciate the reshuffle on the schedule. With that, I'll turn it back over to you all.
Thanks, Erin. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Were there any questions for Erin?
I have one. Rick Huber, two property owner, properties that I own out of the flood stuff, taxpayer, council person. So where does FEMA, where do you come into, if I'm right on this statement, 2/3 or 80% of the flood insurance policies are in Custer County, and Yellowstone River is the big, or 80% or 2/3 are in Custer County, considering the whole state of Montana is what I've heard. And the Yellowstone River is the biggest risk in Montana. Is that correct, or are you part of that?
I don't do the mapping side, so I can't really tell you if that's the highest risk. I know my FEMA counterpart and I, Diana Herrera, were out there last year and we drove along the highway along the Yellowstone. And yeah, it was pretty devastating. I'm actually honestly shocked how many homes are built really close to the river. Obviously older homes, but just breaks my heart when I see that. I can't speak to the policy, like the policy density by county. I didn't look at that before I got onto the call. I mean, if you want to follow up afterwards, I can probably look into that tomorrow for you, just to look at, where the bulk of our policies are. What's interesting after these flood events is we see an increase in policies the first 2 years after you guys have a large disaster. And then our policy count kind of fades off as people think, forget about the risk. And, what's kind of a misnomer on our maps is it's a 1% chance of flooding. Well, you're actually 4 times more likely to have a loss from flooding than any other natural disaster, including fire. And it's the #1 loss of life worldwide for loss of life and property. #1 is flooding. So, and that doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter. And out here out west, that's really hard for people to swallow. It just seems like fire is the bigger risk, but it isn't. It isn't. And when I was trying to update some of these statistics last night, I went online and was looking at some statistics from a variety of scientific sources. And flooding is still number one for the cost to rebuild our communities. And the worst thing a community can do is have a low policy count, because you have a much harder communities that have to rely on disaster assistance and don't have flood insurance. And I applaud, by the way, Miles City, because you guys really have good policy count in your community. I think Samantha's done a great job with getting the word out and people understand the risk. And I just, it's nice to see. And I'll tell you, a lot of higher risk communities do not see it like Miles City does. And so I'm impressed. And so I want to, you guys pat yourself on the back, because it's really hard when you go into some of these disasters. And I do go out for disaster recovery. And you see that once again, a community only had 10% buy through on flood insurance. So 90% of the people who have a loss have no way to recover other than a handout from the feds. And I'll tell you, it's much harder for communities to qualify for disaster assistance where it reaches the individual homeowners. The communities may get money to rebuild bridges or rebuild their infrastructure after flooding, but to meet that requirement for individual assistance is much harder. And I think in Colorado, we had a big event in 2012. I think it was 2012. And before that, we hadn't met the requirement for individual assistance since the 1980s. So it's much harder to meet that requirement. So trying to get that people to understand the flood insurance. And what's kind of cool now is that even if it's not I don't care what kind of policy you have, I'd rather have somebody have a flood policy, even if it's not through the NFIP. There are some insurance companies now that are allowing you to buy an add-on to your insurance for pretty reasonable premium. I don't know what it looks like in Montana. I haven't seen any quotes for private flood where they just add it on to your homeowners, but it's something to look into, because our premium has gone up a lot more. Insurance companies in the private market are willing to come in and compete with us. Our rates, we kept our rates inordinately low for a long time. And so insurance companies knew they couldn't compete. Well, now they can, and they're willing to. So, that's something to talk to people about. If they can't afford our flood insurance, have them shop around, go to an independent insurance agent and talk to them about what else is available. And if you talk to people who want to know more information on how to find an agent who writes private flood insurance, please have them call me. I will help them find an agent in their area who does sell private flood insurance. I'm off my soapbox now. Any other questions? I can't hear whoever's talking. Totally muted. Still nothing. Nothing. Now I almost hear you. It's weird.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is. Where can we get a history of any events in Miles City?
Actually, your local emergency manager, they have to put together a emergency plan every 5 years. And that is part of that plan. They have to pull that history information. It's a great report to look at and to get your hands on. So it may be available online. I don't know if Miles City has it available, but it is available. Anything else? I can't hear. Can you put it in the chat maybe? Can you put it in the chat? His question?
I'll follow you.
There we go. Wait, now I heard something. Say that again.
Okay, Rick Huber again. You mentioned that there's a lot of insurance policies in our community, correct?
Yeah, you had pretty good, you have a pretty good policy count in Miles City. I'm sorry, you're really quiet, so it's hard. I think was that your question? You wanted to know if you had good policy count in Miles City?
No, that was my statement that you said, but isn't it true that we probably have a lot of people that have a house loan and they have to have a policy?
Yes.
So I'm back to the 80% in Custer County policyholders, if I'm correct, in the state of Montana. So my follow-up statement is, or question, FEMA is federal, correct?
Yes.
What is FEMA doing to try to help out our community, Custer County, which encompasses city of Miles City? And if I'm correct, the 80% of the homeowners or policies are in Custer County. This is eastern Montana. Not
So
west.
in terms of help, what are you, I mean, you mean in terms of recovery after the event, or?
Well, if we build a dike or whatever, in some meetings, it's been stated up to $95 million in a town of 88. What do you mean, John?
No, that was a question speculated. You got.
Okay, 8,800 people, 11,000 in Custer County roughly. We're in a big need, and federal government, I think, needs to help eastern Montana, Custer County.
I'll tell you what, it is really worth it to talk with Tracy and the other folks, because I talked tonight about the flood insurance side. That's my specialty. I'm not a grants person, which is what you're talking about, but they did the same thing in terms of looking at equity. And one of the things that they found is that rural communities had a much harder time qualifying for these grants, and they've changed that. So they're making it easier. FEMA is, by the way, anybody who works locally who wants to work remotely for FEMA, they are hiring like crazy in this resilience arena. So if anybody's interested, and there we go, I saw ahead, Bob. It's worth it because they're hiring people remotely to help process and get this grant program and make it more equitable, and getting somebody who's in a smaller community who understands this problem and why you haven't qualified in the past would be ideal to get on and get the conversation going with FEMA headquarters about how to resolve this problem. But they are looking at that, and the grant program is supposed to be addressing that. But it still means you have to apply to the state for those grant dollars. So, you know, a lot of times, especially after a disaster, you guys get a recovery manager who comes in and helps with the recovery. They can also help with these grant applications. So it's not all on Samantha's shoulders. It's not all on the emergency manager's shoulders. And I don't know if your county did that or not, but when Colorado, hang on a second, my dog is dying to go out. Just a second. Let me put her out here. Been very patient while I was waiting on the meeting. I should have run her out before I started talking. But I don't know if you guys got recovery managers like Colorado did, but that's one of the things they did with their grant dollars was the communities hired somebody to help them assess substantial damage buildings, to help them go after these grant dollars and recovery, and not just through FEMA, but, you know, Department of Agriculture has great grant programs, you guys. There's a lot of different organizations, so it's not just FEMA, but I would look to the Department of Agriculture, and there's another Housing and Urban Development, HUD has some great grant programs. And I know the state of Colorado accessed some great HUD grants for their recovery process and to help them with infrastructure. Now, again, I am not a grant expert. I hear about it once a year at an annual meeting. So it's really worth it to talk to the folks at the state in Montana, because they get involved in this, and they're the ones, you know, your numbers and assistant needs are rolled up to the state, and then the state submits that to FEMA. Okay. So that's who you should be coordinating with to get that assistance. And I think the biggest mistake small towns make is they think they don't have the time to go after these grant dollars. Because you do have to administer the program. You know, there's some administration process, and it's, you know, it's the federal government. It's not, you know, we have quite a few requirements. So some small communities say, I'm already wearing 6 hats. I can't put on a 7th. And they're missing dollars because of that.
Thank you.
All right, Aaron, hopefully you can hear me, but
I can.
thank you so much. It was a great presentation.
All right. Take care, you guys. Have a good night.